Hello, movie lovers. Welcome home. My name is Amy Henserling, and you are listening to Watch This List Unplugged. This is my Amy's Progress series, wherein I am attempting to become a more whole, integrated individual via the movies. Today's very special guest, who I have known for, I think, a little bit over a year now, maybe two, is none other than Letterboxd senior editorial producer Brian Formo. Congratulations, Brian, for being at LB, who is here to talk to me about Rosemary's Baby, which is his favorite modern horror film. I don't know if it's your favorite horror film, Brian. Is it your favorite of all time, or just like do you separate these things?
I think it's yeah, it is my favorite of all time. I actually
Okay.
just listened back to we have a on Letterboxd, we have a podcast that's coming out on the day that we're recording this, and it's about religious horror. We were focusing on The Exorcist, and because I knew I'd get to dive into Rosemary's Baby with you, I just snuck it in there that like while we're talking about these other horror movies, like my favorite Catholic horror movie, my favorite horror movie of all time is Rosemary's Baby. I love the subgenre of Catholic horror. I just like, so it is my favorite subgenre.
Very interesting. And would you, I guess The Exorcist would be too, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
That would
Oh, for
definitely
sure.
qualify. Oh, for
Yeah.
sure. Okay. There's a list out here. I mean, there's a list out there somewhere that's got like Catholic horror. I've just never actually sought it myself, but I'm
I
sure
mean,
that's one of my favorite too.
nuns, convents, anything with those Catholic horror, the priests. Yeah.
Benedetta, Verhoeven,
Benedetta, Verhoeven.
of
I mean,
course.
Verhoeven's The Fourth Man, which we've known each other longer than a year.
A
It's been a
year.
couple years, but a year
Okay.
ago I told you that I would send you my disc of The Fourth Man, but I have not done
You
that.
did.
But that has so
That's
that
really
seems to be when you thought we started our friendship is when I let you down by not sending that. Which honestly is that what is a friendship if it's not if there's not a little disappointment?
And really, honestly, you didn't know until now, but that's why I brought you here today. This is an intervention. I would like that DVD stat, and I'm gonna hold this episode hostage until I get it. So that's what
Hard
this is
disk.
really about, Brian.
Yeah, for a year it took me a year to unpack the garage. So that actually and it was in there for a year. Speaking of unpacking, I guess I should just like I feel like up top just wanted to say a little about cuz
Clearing the air.
yeah, if we are talking about Rosemary's Baby, obviously that
Mm,
involves discussing Roman Polanski.
mm.
And I'm actually I know the way that people talk about this type of thing is like separate the art from the artist, but you literally can't separate the artist from the art here because his actual crime that he committed, drugging and raping an underage girl, is the crime that is in here many years before that had happened. So like there's no real separate the art from the artist. What I would say is, even though I'm saying that this is my favorite horror movie of all time, and I'll bring in like you look at like Letterboxd, it's in the top 250 rated movies of all time. It's in the top 7 highest rated horror movies. I personally think that like in discussing a film or giving a film 5 stars, it's not like condoning the criminal acts. And I definitely have to I feel like when we talk about this, it's like condoning actions. Like he did a crime.
Yes.
And so by giving something 5 stars, by discussing it, it's not condoning that. I think you can still find enjoyment from films made by people who have done wrong in this world. And Roman Polanski has done wrong. He's also had wrong done to him, like right after this film came out. There's so much
Hmm.
tied into this because obviously he lost his unborn child through the murder of his wife. Like it's a very there's a lot to unpack in his filmography, but in particular in Rosemary's Baby. But in for the purpose of this podcast, and I know, I mean, if anyone follows me on Letterboxd, I'm very open about many things from my life as I'm getting older, and Yeah, I guess I'll just say up top that if you don't follow me on Letterboxd, I've written occasionally when things like when they hit a certain space for me, I bring up my own history with sexual abuse, of being abused. And I guess like I feel like maybe that provides me a little bit of a floor to talk about how, for me personally, I actually find the closing moments of this film uh, very validating and kind of a beautiful, probably inadvertent admission to something that you carry forward as a victim. And so while
Mm,
he Polanski himself did victimize a an underage girl, I think that there's something in this text, and again, it's based on a novel, or not again, we haven't put that up front, but it is based on a novel, and I think that there's something to glean from how her experience of being gaslit, her experience of assault, her experience of her marriage, how everything kind of coalesces in those closing moments that to me make it a perfect film. I really do
mm.
think that it is a perfect film made by a very, very, very imperfect person. This
And
who's also kind of telling on himself because like yeah, the exact the exact actions in this film he did years later.
do you think that that was, I mean, it's kind of impossible to speculate, I suppose, to any degree of like we would never know, but do you think that he was wrestling with those things within himself and then was aware of that at all, or conscious of doing so, or do you think this was just sort of like you're drawn to the material that speaks to you whether you're aware of it or not?
Yeah, I think it's that. I mean, if we are talking about this era, this is the first major Hollywood movie that he had made. He'd made
Right.
films in Europe and then in the UK, which is part of Europe. But he'd made, you know, he started in Poland, which is where he's from. Then did some films to the UK, and this was like kind of his graduation film. I think that I think it was a paycheck job. Like I don't, I can't obviously speak to anything in his headspace, but I think that this
Right.
was, this was a popular book. Uh, it was his first Hollywood film, and he knocked it out of the park. And but I don't know that there would necessarily be maybe certain things that would be like on his mind of like, oh, I need to make this movie because of X reason. I think it was
Right.
like a career jump move.
And that, well, it's, I mean, Ira Levin is the person who wrote the book in 67, and then the movie came out in 68. And Levin himself said that this was the most faithful film adaptation of a book. I mean, it's so faithful. It's like down to color schemes and pages of dialogue. I think he said there was only like one part of the book that wasn't in the film. So I mean, it's also not just that Polanski. It was the first time that he was using someone else's material, but he did it scrupulously, like to the T, which is, I think, is very telling too. That he
It
didn't
is
like necessarily interject himself, other than his style. Obviously, this is like an entire work of fiction. He was a Levin was a Jewish atheist, so he did not believe in any of it. I read that he wrote it because his wife was pregnant, and he had done what was it called? Kiss Me. Oh my gosh, I'm
not
blanking out on
Kiss
the
Me
name.
Kate.
Not Kiss Me Kate. It was like ah, A Kiss Before Dying. He
Mm.
wrote a book called A Kiss Before Dying. He had a hit play, and then he was like looking for his next idea. And then in 66, the Time magazine article, Is God Dead, came out. And then he had this idea that like, what if not only God was dead, but what if the devil lived? And that's what sort of bore this idea. And then he paid attention to his wife's pregnancy, basically taking notes so that he was able to write about that. So that's an interesting trajectory to me of like, how much the context of what this came out of, both in terms of Levin, culturally, Polanski, and then before and after, like you said, where it was like the movie was cursed because a series of terrible things happened after it came out. And Levin himself even reportedly like regretted writing the novel like years and years later because it spawned so many, I think he put it like irrational people to start cults and believe in Satan. And he was sad that, that his work sort of inspired that to happen.
When you bring up the time cover piece, which is referenced in the film as well, but something so I rewatched this for this recording, but I had not. Okay, so my background with I mean my background with Catholicism is very very limited. I am married to a woman, went to a Catholic all girls school, but that's about that's
As
about as
far as
far
your
as things have gone for me. She also wasn't raised Catholic, but Episcopalian.
mm,
Um, so, but one thing that I did not know about for the years that I had seen this prior, but I do know about now and really glommed onto, is the first dream sequence. In this film, I think it's the first, it might be the second, but when she's uh laying in bed and you can hear the there's paper thin walls with her neighbor, and you can hear what the two of them are saying, which they are the Satanist couple, Ruth Gordon and Sidney Blackmer. So Ruth
that's
Gordon and
okay.
Sidney Blackmer,
Yeah.
you hear them. It's already established many times prior to this scene that the walls are paper thin, and you can kind of hear what's happening on the other side. One night, it informs Rosemary's dreams, and part of that is while it is Ruth Gordon speaking, um, and after there's already been a death in the building,
Yes.
um, they you hear Ruth Gordon speaking. Sometimes I don't know why you're the leader of anything, but through in Rosemary's dream, it's said by a nun, and this I really glommed onto because this film came out. So I believe 67, I believe, was the first year of them actualizing um, the Vatican II,
Mm,
and part of the Vatican II, a lot of it was like restructuring of various things of power within the church and updating a little bit. But one thing that they updated in the Vatican II was putting the nuns. The nuns were no longer like an extension of God; they were basically just parishioners.
mm,
So their level within the church dropped a ton, and many nuns left because they thought that this was sexist, and that like it was not just sexist, but a tradition that actually involved them in the church was being removed, and it was only like powerful men. There was no more like the nuns
mm.
no longer had any power or any or were basically being told
Authority.
uh, any advice from a nun does not come from God. It only comes, the advice from God comes from these other people. So to have a
Mm,
nun with a woman's voice, Ruth Gordon's voice, saying, "Sometimes I don't know why you're the leader of anything," to her husband because she thinks that he made a mistake involving the first woman who had committed suicide, because they probably were going to do the same thing to her that they end up doing to Rosemary, but she's blaming him, and she's obviously the more uh,
dominant.
dominant. And actually, pretty much all the women in their group are the more dominant, and I found that very very interesting. Just thinking of the when this came out, that the Vatican II was just right there, and the nun imagery in that really stuck out to me. So that's one thing, just like circulating around the '60s as well.
Well, and I think that the whole thing of like having something come out that was religion themed when it was like people were doubting the existence of God and more bewildered. There was a lot more secularization uh, happening and sort of chaos and uncertainty. And then this article comes out, which uh, is I read the entire thing. I was just gonna look it up, and then I ended up reading the entire article, which was superb. I thought it was so um well thought out. Like he quotes all different sorts of people, not just like theologians or people who don't believe, but it's like scientists and philosophers, and he's really grappling the religious editor who wrote it at the time, John Elson, like he really was trying to get at something. And I feel like Rosemary's Baby was like that tapping into something, because it was so, it hit a nerve at the time that was already sort of festering with these big questions, because they were like, if this came out today, probably no one would care. Like it wouldn't even make any waves. And at the time it was a big deal. It was pretty controversial, and he got a lot of hate mail and got a lot of like venomous reactions, which to me just
Yeah,
screamed that nobody read it. But
a few years later, The Exorcist had the same issue, and like Linda Blair needed to have personal security with her for many months after the film came out, because people were uh, concerned that she still was possessed by the devil. I mean, obviously, The Last Temptation of Christ with Martin Scorsese,
yes.
and the bomb threats of theaters. I think so much around religion in films during this period, like, yeah, you're right, there's no one threatening to, or I guess I can't say no one. I don't think that there's a known desire to bomb the Exorcist believer right now.
Yeah, if
But
anything, people are very jaded now. I
yeah,
mean, they just don't really react in the same way.
yeah, and like you see again with like the Catholic Church bringing up the Vatican II, that's after hundreds of years of tradition feeling like need to update. But now you see the Catholic Church, and particularly this Pope consistently having to try to update to like keep people who feel open-hearted, like that it's okay to be open-hearted to groups that have been um, kept separate from
Mm.
from the Catholic Church for a long time. So they're like the necessity to uh, update church to modern life, or to, on the opposite side, to like withdraw and retreat further back, because you kind of see both poles being used. That itself like speaks to the jadedness of like kind of the middle section the majority of people exist more in now, whereas when this came out and The Exorcist, there was less separation of church and state, I guess.
Yeah, it's somebody, I read a comment that I thought was really good, where it was like, the article was called "Is God Dead?" in '66, and if such an article came out today, it would be titled "Is That You, God?"
That's
Meaning
true.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, that kind of shows like it's not that necessarily people think that God's dead, but it's like, what is God? How would I know if I even, yeah, there's this spirituality I think that people feel, but then it's like, is that you? So yeah, this all ties so well into the vibe of this thing, because the movie is very powerful and it's scary. And I think that like it, almost in comparison to Exorcist 3, just because that's fresh on my mind, that's another movie that's like heavily Catholic, written by someone who believes that the devil exists, which is different than Levin. But still, you can kind of feel that palpable fear going on. And then Rosemary's Baby also has a ton of relatable anxieties in it, that I think are kind of funny. Like if you think about like, annoying neighbors, and like there's also like, just the things of like the lying spouse, paranoia, pregnancy, um you know, gaslighting obviously is another one, and then like patriarchy, tradition. There's just a lot going on in this movie, also just besides the spiritual parts.
Oh, and I mean, yeah, gaslighting is a common term now. But just like the general distrust of anyone is more pronounced now. There was kind of like this the 70s, there was a lot of paranoia, and that came through in
Mm.
70s film. The 60s was kind of like is a lot of butting up against I mean countercultures and uh more mainstream culture that had been in place for a very long time. But I mean, we bring up Polanski, the Manson murders were kind of like when a lot of things shifted of like distrust of neighbors or looking at your neighbors. It used to be like community was more, you should have an open door, you don't lock your doors, and like where it was a little church like in that the people who around you are I mean they're basically part of your coven if you will or something. They're just and they're supposed to help, you know, instill values within your children. You're supposed to like have barbecues and like there just was, that's more suburban. But I think the general like the way that people kind of look at skepticism with everyone around them is very much more a newer thing. I think like if you look at the Manson killings, that itself was kind of very more you know what look around. Hollywood itself was very unique at that time, in that while there are movie stars, there are you know big bands and there are famous people everywhere. It kind of was really easy for normal people to hang out, and that stopped in the 60s. I got a little taste of that when I moved to LA. The accessibility I feel like kind of had opened back up a little bit again. People were feeling comfortable, but I think also just like, I mean, pandemic onward and Trump onward and just conspiracy theories onward, which is obviously a part of like 70s filmmaking, conspiracy theories. I think that like the way that people are looking at everyone around them as having to prove that they're decent, as opposed to just like believing that everyone around you isn't indecent until they show, or everyone around you is decent until they show otherwise. And I think that that's something that like Rosemary's Baby is at at the exact perfect time to make a film kind of around that distrust, because there already is kind of percolating like the seams of society feel like are already coming undone in a very chaotic way, but people don't really understand what is at the center of like why they feel like they're kind of being like torn apart a little bit.
And it's not even really restricted to the societal. It's also like you can't trust your husband.
Yeah.
You can't trust somebody in your own home. That's like the whole true crime explosion in our culture where people are so morbidly fascinated by like you're murdered by somebody you knew and you didn't even know them. That whole thing of like that's the really scary thing is like what if it's in your home? What if it's in your bed? What if it's in your body? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I think that like that's really the horror part to me is you've got these outside fixtures where it's like I can't, can I trust my doctor? Nope. Can I trust my neighbors? Nope. Can I, and that, but then it hones in on who even got you to those outside tiers. It was the person that you're married to and you've got nobody else.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah,
Except for
this is,
Hutch.
yeah, except for Hutch and the girl who jumps off the
Yeah,
building.
they
They
get
they
rid of
they
they
had a nice tete-a-tete in the laundry room.
or I mean an additional interesting little layer there, bring up the doctors and yeah kind of yeah now you in modern times you have like people wanting to do their own research in the way that we have like the ability to Google everything. It makes it so that people feel like very quick to understand things that actually are very incredibly difficult and require like an actual many years of study. But like we feel
Yeah.
like it can be gleaned really quickly. But Charles
Mm.
Grodin's doctor, who is like a good doctor, it is interesting the little kind of shift there. He believes her in what she's saying and is going to help her until she mentions the doctor's name, and that's like someone he is aware is respected in the doctor community. Is like, oh, actually, this must she must be making this up, and she's crazy. Like that's when it shifts. Like it really, he is there to help her until she mentions the doctor's name of like, oh, actually, I should just call that doctor because obviously he would never do something like this, because he probably, which the this I'm so used to like having to preface things in our letterbox show things. I assume that anyone watching this has probably seen Rosemary's Baby, but if
Oh, of
haven't
course. We have to assume
yeah,
that
yeah,
always.
yeah.
Yes, you're on your own, guys. We love you, but sorry.
Okay.
Yes. So proceed in that fashion for sure. Yes.
Yeah, that like yeah, I guess actually no, that closes that thought because I was going to fill in more of like what the doctor is doing, but we know what the doctor is doing.
Yeah, it's also that sense of like I think Mark, my friend Mark is the one that said like how the movie gives you that feeling of like that you're not crazy, but then everybody else treats you like you're crazy and that things that are logical are illogical and then you start to go crazy thinking that like why aren't they, that feeling of like panic that like I'm actually making sense and I know that I'm making sense and I'm holding on to this sense that I'm making, but then everyone's feedback to me is that I'm not. And that feeling is so frightening and horrifying because then like what do you do? You're like a rat in a maze and you're like at the mercy of your surroundings completely. Uh and in her case, she couldn't get out.
And in her case as well, when you are being gaslit effectively,
Mm,
um and so like John Cassavetes, because he was there for the ritual, he also has his own guilt that he basically stops looking at her, um
mm,
and she is aware of this, and she, even when they are trying to reconnect or something like that, she absolves him of his actual role in it by trying to make it even and saying like it's as my fault as much as yours. Now obviously she doesn't know at this point the gravity of everything, but the marked change that he suddenly has where his career is taking off and he can't even bring himself to look at her when she's in the room, she's aware of, and
mm,
she internalizes it as her own fault.
mm. Yeah. It's almost like uh it makes me think of Wake and Fright, where the scariest things, the scariest horror are men. Um or like the evil that men do, to quote Shakespeare. Um and like if they are possessed by something, whether it's in Wake and Fright, alcohol, or whether it's power or corruption, um, that is actually scarier than Satan and actually scarier than the Antichrist. To me, the scariest thing in that movie is Cassavetes at the end of the day.
I,
Um,
I mean, if you bring up
which,
Wake and
yeah,
Fright into this, like that is the my
mm,
worst nightmare is to be stuck with alpha men.
yeah,
And some of that has to do with my previous personal history, but also that like it took a long time for me to have like multiple male friends because I just like couldn't, um I didn't have the build or desire to hang out in the way that men did together. Um
mm,
and Wake and Fright, that is what it is. It's like this drinking, ramping up, uh, and doing terrible things, or just feeling like the world is yours to destroy. Uh,
yes.
yeah,
Yes. And you can see, I mean, at least for me, and I mean, I'm saying this as someone who's also newly sober, so I'm quite sensitive to this as well. When I see people like drinking a lot on film now, I take it very differently. But in this one, especially because it's like that um, ingesting something that animates you and makes you do things that you wouldn't normally otherwise. But then there to add like this demonic presence where they're like murdering innocence, and they're like you can just feel that. And I think in Rosemary's Baby he does an excellent job of like, especially in the rape scene, where you can feel that something is just terribly malicious. And I just thought of this too. This is something that I read that I hadn't written down, was that it's ironic that the title of the film and the title of the book is Rosemary's Baby, because in the film, her agency and ownership are both taken away, but Rosemary's Baby is personhood and agency, like that it's her baby, and actually it isn't at all. And it's not even that her agency is missing, it's been taken. So there's like all these levels of like breaking someone down, and just them not being able to have access to themselves. That's also frightening and just terrifying. So I think a lot of this works on a subconscious level psychologically.
The the part on rewatch that also stood out for me, just like within that scene, because I definitely remembered uh vividly the way that the levels of the boat were, and
Mm,
how picturesque the view on the boat was before like being told to like go down into, what is it called underneath the boat, the cabin, I guess, to go
the
down, and
cabin.
yeah, to go down into the cabin, which is just like complete darkness. But then prior
Mm,
to that, everything is like gorgeous and lush, like a Slim Aarons was a photographer in the 60s that was very popular, that kind of just uh I mean, mostly just like very rich European vacations. But the photography of that was, and that's also influenced a lot of style, etc. But it's like going from that pop world into like that world that it's just completely dark, and there's a bed, but there. I was listening more to dialogue, I guess, this time through those dream sequences. I like vividly committed to memory the visualization and the sound of those dream sequences.
mm.
And this is obviously like, it's not a dream. She even says this isn't a dream, this is real. But like
This is real.
she's still operating in dream mode. But something that is happening in that is the woman who uh very outwardly is seemingly giving kindness, and I think also within their ritual probably thinks that she's being kind by saying to her, like, what does she say? I actually wrote this down incorrectly because I had to put down the captions on it. I think it actually works better before the captions. But what I had heard was, if it bothers you, let me know and I'll have it stop. While they're tying her uh,
Wow.
ankles down. And she says, don't stop the program on my account. Like, very, again, going back to kind of where the people who um, are preyed on the most are maybe the people who feel like, oh, don't do this on my behalf.
Mm.
It does, and that is not to say that like someone who operates in that way like deserves anything, but they're and absolutely not. But there is kind of like this deference that Rosemary has all the time, or like if there's something is an issue, she'll make it see like how it's even, and it's actually something that is honestly, I think, like a very good homeostasis to have with people, but it like people can manipulate that. And so, but
Right.
what the actual line is if the music bothers you, let me know and I'll have it stop. But I had heard it as if this bothers you, let me know. Which,
Oh,
yeah,
totally different, completely
completely
different
different.
things. Be- because that would have implied that she had a choice, which I don't think that they were giving.
No, definitely not. But I
Right.
think it was more just like because she only had taken a little bit of the drugged chocolate mousse, chocolate mouse.
That's right.
that that is why she's actually more present than she should have been. Those are air quotes if people are listening. And I think that that
Right.
woman who was saying that, and everyone in the room was aware that she seemed to be a little more aware of what was happening than she should be. And some people were trying to be, I guess, gentler about it, even though it had to carry through because, one night only type of thing that they were doing. But that, yeah. Does that make any sense?
So do you think do you think that there is this implication of empathy? I mean, do you get this sense that they see this as like, this has to happen, but like, we're really sorry, like, versus like, I just thought of like how the crucifixion is always portrayed, which is that nobody felt bad and they just kept going until until it ended, and then the sky goes dark and then it's like, oh shoot. But in this way, maybe it was like, are we trying to believe that they are kind of like, oh, it's unfortunate that this has to happen this way, but we did try to drug you, and it's your fault for being conscious because you didn't eat the whole thing. Sort of vibe is what I'm feeling like maybe
Yeah,
is
I
accurate.
think that at least that the woman that I'm referencing here, I think, and maybe some in, in the room. I mean, even her husband does say like she's not out, but he doesn't. I mean, he's obviously he's selfish already, obviously to to
Right,
set up this thing. But
right.
that itself, I think, is why he. I mean, maybe without that, maybe he probably still would have stopped looking at her in the way that he did. But I think that eyes are very, very, very important in this film. Obviously, because like that's also almost the closing shot of the film is the baby's eyes, or
Right.
and the discussion of his eyes. I think that because people could see that she was more conscious than she should be, that some people who
Mm,
maybe have more of the muscle of empathy had more guilt in the moment, but knowing that it couldn't be turned back.
right. Okay. And that it wasn't necessarily intended, but it was just what it was. And
Yeah.
it was kind of like the ends justify the means anyways at that point, because they just wanted the event to take place, and she was more or less just the vessel, like you said at the beginning.
Yeah.
So what do you think about do you feel like, because I know you said at the beginning that the ending for you is quite powerful, there are some people whose reviews I read that were really excellent that felt like the film has no catharsis, because even her deciding to be a mother to the child is exactly what the coven wanted, because they actually want her to be. So actually nothing happens that isn't in accordance with the Satanists. In that sense, it's almost like, do you find that there is catharsis in the film at all? And if so, what is it that you feel?
Well, I'll answer that second because I would first like to get to the question that you raised. Did everything happen to according to the Satanist plan? I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that it did because again, there are a couple choices that Rosemary makes throughout the film, and the one that she repeats is to stop taking or take less of the drugs that she is being given. So she I think what the Satanists want her to be, they want to raise a child on her own and for her to believe that it was lost, it died in childbirth. It's only through like hearing the baby through the paper thin walls during the
Yeah,
period where
that's right.
she's supposed to be drugged and knocked out again for days. And also like using drugs as a way to manipulate that, like, oh, you don't remember the birth because it was so painful uh and you lost the child, and also it destroyed your body so much that we've had to like keep you on drugs for weeks and weeks and weeks, and at that point the baby would probably be taken somewhere else. So I actually don't think that things happened like they
They
were
wanted
supposed
her.
to. They, it's
Okay.
really only one person in the room. It is, I mean, to go back to the Vatican too, it's like the most outspoken man in the room, and the Sydney Blackshear's character, he's the one who says like, let her be the mother. Everyone, no one else in that room wants her to do it. And they're also like, it is, if there's one fault in the movie, it is a very quick second, but like the way that the one woman is rocking that baby so chaotically, no one would be doing that to
Yes. No.
a baby. Like no one would
That
think that
person
that's
has no idea.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But so no, I don't think that it happens as it's supposed to in that regard.
In that respect, then, do you think it has catharsis? Do you feel like it is a cathartic ending, or do you think that it's sort of, because I could see it I could see it either way.
Um, could I? I'll. I will share my read, but I'd like to throw it back at you first. Like,
Uh,
do you find, is there any catharsis or release? And I don't think that there necessarily has to be one. Even though it ends on a lullaby, like it is a dark ending, but I have a personal reason for catharsis feeling, or not catharsis feeling from the ending, but just like kind of the way that it makes me feel. But like, what does the ending make you feel?
okay, so what do I think? Um, I don't find it cathartic, because I feel like what I would have done in her place was to kill the baby. And I think that would have been the only action that would have truly like restored her sense of like, I don't know, control or just power at all. Because I think that sort of accepting it as is and wanting to take care of it, while that is like a motherly instinct that makes sense somebody would have, for a horror film and for like the arc of the movie, I think it would have been way more gnarly and just like, I don't know, transformed the nature of it to have her be like, no, and then get rid of it. And she doesn't care at all what happens to her, or what the consequences is, but she doesn't want there to be evil in the world. And she can put her aside that instinct and do what's necessary. Kind of almost like, actually Abraham and Isaac in a weird way, where it's like you're willing, even though that wasn't in the case of evil, but it is like that willingness is kind of frightening in itself. I've used the word frightening a lot, but like very scary to think that a parent could do anything like that. But if she did, I think that would have been a more of a relief ending and something that I would have liked more than where it goes.
Um, so my read on the ending is, I mean, it's abstract and it's personal. So like, it'd just be like adding my own, and I think it would also change for me over years as well. I think the maybe the first time I'd watched it, I definitely wouldn't have been thinking this. The first time I watched
Mm.
it would have been in college, and then uh, I think maybe it did feel a little incomplete, but the way that it feels complete to me now is kind of marked by more my openness to engage with and talk about my past. So um the so I will just, I guess, get into that so that I can say what I have to say about the ending,
Mm.
um which is, um I was sexually abused at two different points in my life by completely different people. um One, I don't even know who they were. I know that it was people that I took karate lessons with. I was 6.
Mm.
Don't have to get into like the details of like what is actually happening, but it is um, I brought up the eyes and how important they are in this film. He has his father's eyes, etc. The eyes are darting when you do see them in the crib. It seems like something is very wrong. Um,
Right.
for myself, because like for a self coping mechanism, while what was occurring, I I couldn't make eye contact with people, and that has like affected me kind of like throughout most of my life. Whenever I'm thinking of difficult things to say, or whenever I'm processing anything, my eyes can never. I can only give people eye to eye contact in certain scenarios, but otherwise, it's like I have to like look elsewhere. So that's like something within this film that she does look at head on. The okay, so the other part is as I got older, uh, it happened again and more pervasive when I was 13 years old, and one individual, I know who that person is. They are currently serving a life sentence in the Idaho State Penitentiary. Um, and but it was something that while that had occurred to me over the course of a summer, and I was able to extricate myself out. I mean, the moment that kind of like became too much for me, and I was very similar to Rosemary, in that like kind of like, oh, it's not just this person's fault. I'm also allowing this, or like, or not allowing, but like I'm not um, taking. In some way, I was to blame for what was happening because I wasn't removing myself. I very
Mm.
specifically did remove myself when I got a phone call at home from the perpetrator, which like that was like the bridge too far. Those are things that I knew that had occurred in my life, but I never looked at them. I tried to pretend that they didn't exist. Uh, when that started, and that informed many parts of my life, in that like I didn't really know how to get out some aggression and anger that I had. It also informed my I choose flight over fight. That's like my psychological pattern. I always choose flight. And even like that's the how I was able to remove myself from that situation was through flight as opposed to fight. Um, and so like, and I was in the music scene for a long time. I was in a band. I even the band that I was in, we had a song called Rosemary, where I actually take some lyrics from this movie and scream them over and over, which is monsters, unspeakable doctors, hospitals. It's when she's on. It's two separate parts, but they're very close together. Um, so the way that I was like dealing with was more kind of like screaming in a microphone, maybe, and various other things. I've written about it a lot on Letterboxd, and a number of people have sent me messages that it was very like helpful for them. And
Mm.
so, and my relationship to, and kind of as I get older and I kind of look back at various touchstones in my life, and I swear this will come back to Rosemary's Baby. When I kind of look at how I have psychologically operated, um, it, moments where I've been silent or just despite discomfort, or feeling like I need to like just like get the hell out of some place, and just like the desire to flee, um, and also just like moments within intimacy being in my head or not, and like the differences uh, with people between those. I guess I becoming more and more. I became more and more aware that like trauma is a bad experience that obviously like reverberates throughout your life, and the only way that you can really deal with it is looking at it head on. And when you look at it head on, then you have to, it's something that you realize that you have to take care of. And taking care of something is, it's not like granting it power, it's just like awareness. And I guess that is my very like long-winded way of saying that for me, when she looks at, she's, I look at the baby at the end as her looking at her trauma, what has happened to her. And before she wanted to just like eradicate it, have it be gone. She goes in with a knife. She wants to do kind of what you're saying. Like, I want to like stab this
Right.
thing. And then she looks at it, and it maybe some part of it like reflects back. When I look back at my trauma, I can see like there are actually aspects of my personality that I think uh, grew from traumatic experience, that made me uh, more of a listener maybe than I maybe otherwise would have been. We go back to like Wake and Fright. I feel
Mm.
like I never would have become an alpha male, but I think I definitely uh, I think a number of the aspects around my personality and my ability to be present and friends with women was like, I had for a long time, like there was no underlying like, how am I going to like get this person to date me type of thing, where I was much more present.
Mm.
So
And
like,
not manipulative.
yeah, and I think that reinforced something that I also liked about myself. And I
Right.
think that part of that did come from personal discomfort in my own body. And so
Mm.
awareness of like, it's mostly negative, but there are some like areas of like coping within life that like I think trauma does make us, um it can make people better. And it's not saying that like people should be traumatized because something good might come out of it. But I think that the way that we process trauma and our own discomfort with ourselves uh, does create a solid foundation. So when I'm looking at, um, and they have actually done studies about how getting over trauma actually does, um, it creates new muscles and thought processes for people that actually
Mm-hmm.
does kind of like, I mean, the scientific proof wouldn't say like it makes them better people, but I think that's like the leap maybe that I'm taking here. Um, and so when I look at her looking at this baby and deciding that she needs to take care of it, that is like, as I've gotten older, I kind of view it more as like, this ugly thing that had happened to me, I can't change that it had happened. Uh, I can only like look at it straight in the eyes and take care of it and try to. And I know that like there's a read within that is my own personal thing that doesn't apply, because it also, I mean, if you look at politics and things like that, then you could say that like, oh, this is like what Republicans want, is like someone to take care of the baby that they only got from rape. That's not the area that I'm like approaching anything here. It's more just like taking care of the trauma, uh, learning how to grow with it. Which, as a mother, you are growing with your child, etc. So it's that's how I view it, in a kind of like freeing, cathartic type way.
That's very powerful, Brian. I almost cried just then. So thank you for sharing that with us. And I think that that is quite possibly the most powerful read that could be taken from that ending that I would never have even considered. It also reminded me of sort of that, if you read about like the shadow side or like the inner child, it's that same, not exactly the same vein as trauma, perhaps, but it is that same thing of like being gentle and gracious with yourself, even the parts of you that are you're trying to discard or are unacceptable to society or are inconvenient, whether it's that you were a victim or have tendencies to abuse others or what have you. It's like it's unconsciousness that kills us. It's being detached uh, from things that will destroy from the inside, because it is like you're saying, it will out in some way, and if you're unconscious of it, it can hurt you. But it's so tricky because you don't want to say that you could redeem something evil, especially suffering done to you that was completely wrong and inexcusable. But then at the same time, what option do you have? I mean, you can either um, take care of it, as you're saying, lovingly, and do the work that would require, or stifle it and then suffer in different ways because of it. So it's really powerful. I think that's a very relatable, universal struggle, even for someone like myself who doesn't have necessarily direct events, but there are things where I do have to confront and do that. And it's for my own sake that I do that, not for them. Like, not, you don't forgive for the person, you do it for yourself. So that taking care of action is taking care of you.
Yeah, and that, I mean, it is, I guess, like what, because I've always struggled with self-care. Self-care has been the hardest thing for me.
Mm.
Or even just kind of like being only with myself is something that I've always not, in any of the things that I kind of like behave in ways that I regret, it's only with myself, which is strange. Um,
I understand.
but it's so like, I mean, this baby is the spawn of Satan, but it is also the spawn of her. Um,
Mm.
she is within it. So I think that like the way that people look at trauma traditionally is like trying to kind of separate and keep things in different boxes, and like maybe it's like you have to visit it like it's a separate
Like
compartment.
compartmentalization.
Yeah, like maybe like in therapy you have to like go look in that box, but ultimately like that is just, it is just in you all the time.
One room versus a room full of boxes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that is to me like why, like, I mean, just like within a crib, within a small, like, and also like the trauma itself doesn't know, like a child doesn't know its surroundings. It does not know when something is the right time to like kind of like bubble up or within your brain. Like it just does it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it is something that instead of like kind of looking elsewhere or trying to keep it somewhere hidden back or just like pushed aside, that you have to be more aware of like when it actually is crying,
Yeah.
and then how that makes you react, and then how you have to keep it from crying, or not like by smothering, but just soothing.
Right.
And that's what
And
she
it's
does at
that,
the end of the film. Like she is soothing a crying child.
and she's aware, because it could have ended with her not even knowing that the baby existed, not seeing it, and then it just ends.
Yeah.
And like they get their way, and she goes on thinking, okay, and then maybe has another kid down the line. But instead, it's like she actually is forced. Well, not forced, but I mean, she comes to the point of confronting it directly, and then she does actually make a decision. Um, so it's just how you read that decision, and then how you sort of contextualize it in terms of both horror and the time that it came out, of what it's saying, and if it's depressing or not. So it's definitely very nuanced in that way, of open to interpretation. I don't think it can just be sort of the straightforward like The Exorcist is. that's a straightforward finale where it's like there is clear good, clear evil, and we wrap things up
Yeah.
with a sacrifice.
Yeah. A
Yeah,
sacrifice, and
which most
depending which
Christian things do.
version you see, uh, a detective saying, "Do you want to go to the movies with me?"
Right. Well, Brian, this has been a pleasure. You have perhaps more than any of my other episodes, this has exemplified Amy's progress, the idea behind it, more fully than I have experienced so far. So thank you for enriching this mission that I'm sort of on, both for myself and just in sharing, because I do feel like you described that if we can talk about things and they aren't so secret and so shameful, it can help other people. And that's the point. That is, if like talking about addiction, making it easier to say like, I'm sober or I'm in recovery. I mean, I don't hear people doing that. And there's this like discomfort, and it's not good because we already feel so alone in those behaviors when we're in them. And that's a huge problem. So I think being able to talk about these things is maybe uncomfortable as they are generally. It's very important to me now. I know it's important to you. So I feel very kindred with you in this. And I hope that anybody listening felt less alone.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And I would also just say that, I mean, also in ways that I am talking about trauma, or even just like like their individual experiences, and that's not
Yes.
um like if what I'm saying like doesn't sound like the right coping to someone, and they cope a different way, then that is whatever works well for you. For me, um analyzing my behavior is very similar to like analyzing film. Like I like to get into like
Me too.
the many layers of it's the only way
Mm.
that I can engage with myself where it feels proactive. And
Yes.
I also like with this, I mean, we met to do this originally a couple weeks back, and we chatted about a few personal things, and I feel very kindred to you as well, in your journey, and I appreciate your openness in sharing things here. It actually was very helpful to me in actually seeing have how I have used bottles to cope with things throughout my life. I said punk rock here, but like that, that was part of that as well. And yeah, I've it's been 3 weeks for me, so
Congratulations, Brian. I if nothing else, the gets me emotional, but I hope that the honesty, the radical honesty, is what fosters healing, because that is what did it for me, is being able to tell the truth and being there's like a quote that I love that's like vulnerability sounds like truth and feels like courage. And the more that you can be open to telling the truth and being courageous, you're not only healing, but you are making yourself accessible so that people can come to you and say like, I'm struggling with this too, or I also feel this way. And to me, there's no greater purpose than to be this such a person that could be available to anyone who's suffering alone. So in any small way we can do that, especially through the movies. It's just so unique, and I feel very privileged to be able to do so.
yeah. And I think that movies, unfortunately, like were also like a part of the reason why I couldn't be open for a while, just like how things were put on the screen about uh
Mm,
people like myself. But that has changed so much in the last couple of years, and it's very interesting to look at that narrative through film as well, where we're actually like suddenly there isn't just like trying to like find ways to blame people or institutions, and it's just like actual empathy, and
Yes.
and there is more patience from people to hear, as opposed to it being something that like, and I think that that's very that's not the era that I grew up in, and I think it's a great step forward. And anyone who, I mean, if people, if anyone wants to reach out about any of that stuff, I've gotten it through Letterbox, and I'm happy to talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a wonderful it's kind of a redemptive way for social media to be, because a lot of times it's just the opposite of that, and like taking people down and trolling and being so negative and so cutting. And I know that in a way that's enacting out of people's own pain too, but to be able to edify or to use this as any kind of safe space is just a gift. So thanks to Letterboxd for that, because I wouldn't even be here without that.
Same.
So yeah, so we'll give a shout out there. Brian, it's been a pleasure and an honor to talk to you today, and we'll see you at the movies.